The air inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse was heavy that morning, thick with tension, expectation, and the faint echo of rustling papers and whispers. Spectators filled every available seat, murmuring to one another, unsure whether they were watching a routine court hearing or the beginning of something far more extraordinary. Judge Walter Grayson leaned back in his leather chair, the polished wood of the bench gleaming beneath the soft courtroom lights. His fingers drummed against the edge of the desk in a rhythm that suggested both boredom and superiority. Across from him, at the defendant's table, stood a young man who looked far too small for the storm he was in. 19-year-old Jalen Dawson stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders squared, chin raised, not defiantly, but with quiet confidence. He didn't look scared. He didn't look like a criminal either. But the file in Judge Grayson's hands told a different story. "Jalen Dawson," Grayson said, adjusting his glasses, "charged with grand theft auto and resisting arrest. That about right?" Jalen didn't respond. He didn't need to. The judge's smirk was condescending, almost theatrical. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" he asked with a chuckle. "This isn't debate club, kid." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff cracked a grin. The stenographer paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keys. Even the prosecutor, a sharply dressed man named Mitchell Carrington, chuckled under his breath. It was clear. They all thought this was going to be easy. A slam-dunk case against a cocky teenager who didn't know his place. But Jalen didn't flinch. He wasn't rattled. He had spent years preparing for this. Not this exact trial, no, but for this kind of moment. While his friends were memorizing sports stats or losing hours to video games, Jalen was reading legal journals, reenacting courtroom arguments in front of the mirror, studying the justice system not because he had to, but because he wanted to understand the rules that governed the world around him. His mother, Denise Dawson, had worked as a paralegal for over 2 decades. From her, Jalen had absorbed more than most law students learn in their first year. She used to tell him bedtime stories not about dragons or pirates, but about real-life battles, judges who bent the law, prosecutors who skipped corners, defense attorneys who fought against impossible odds. And Jalen soaked it all in like a sponge. He didn't plan on standing in a courtroom as a defendant, but now that he was here, he was ready. Judge Grayson flipped open the case file, sighing. "Let's make this quick. I've got a golf game at 2. The courtroom laughed again, but this time, Jalen smiled too, just barely. Because Judge Grayson had already made his first mistake. He wasn't taking this seriously. Carrington rose smoothly, walking toward the jury with the ease of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. His voice rang out, strong and confident, the kind of delivery honed through repetition. "Your Honor," Carrington began, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6 reported missing just hours before his arrest." He paused, letting the words settle like a hammer hitting stone. "Officers pursued the vehicle through downtown Los Angeles, where the defendant allegedly attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence," he concluded, "speaks for itself." Murmurs filled the courtroom. It all sounded so clear-cut. An open and shut case. But Jalen's eyes didn't waver. He watched Carrington with the calm precision of someone who saw what others didn't, the cracks beneath the surface. "And the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz," Carrington continued, "confirms he personally saw the defendant behind the wheel." Grayson leaned forward. "Sounds straightforward to me," he muttered. But nothing about this case was straightforward. Jalen knew it. He'd seen enough trials to know when a story didn't quite line up. And now, it was his turn. The judge turned to the defense. Jalen's court-appointed attorney, Lisa Thornton, rose slowly, her nerves obvious. She had barely spoken since entering the room. "Your Honor," she began, voice shaky, "my client—" But Jalen gently touched her arm, signaling her to sit. She looked at him, confused, but then she nodded. Jalen stepped forward. The room went silent. "I'll be representing myself," he said clearly. A beat of stunned silence followed. Grayson squinted at him, amused. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending myself," Jalen repeated. Carrington laughed. "This should be interesting." But no one else was laughing when Jalen spoke again. Not once he began dismantling their case, piece by piece. "Your Honor," Jalen said calmly, "before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Carrington raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." "You stated that Officer Ruiz personally witnessed me behind the wheel. That's what's in his report, correct?" "Yes," Carrington said, already sounding impatient. Jalen turned to the judge. "Then I move to dismiss that testimony." Grayson blinked. "On what grounds?" "Because Officer Ruiz wasn't even on duty when the pursuit began," Jalen said. "He wasn't at the scene, and I can prove it." The murmurs grew louder. Carrington's eyes narrowed. "I request the court subpoena Officer Ruiz's GPS logs for that night. If he was where he claims he was, the logs will show it." Grayson sat forward, intrigued despite himself. "Does the prosecution have any issue with that?" Carrington hesitated. It was just a second, but long enough. The jury noticed. The judge noticed. "No objections," he finally said, but the tide had already shifted. Jalen wasn't done. He stepped toward the jury box, voice calm but unyielding. "Let's talk about the fingerprints," he said. "The prosecution says they prove I stole the car. But think about this. If you walk into a store and try on a jacket, put your hands in the pockets, does that mean you stole it?" Some jurors looked at one another. A couple of people in the gallery nodded. "The car," Jalen continued, "was parked outside a 7-Eleven earlier that day. I was there with friends. I leaned against it. I even opened the door. It was already unlocked. Dumb, sure. But I never stole it, never drove it." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "Does touching something make you a criminal?" He turned to Judge Grayson again. "Was the forensic analyst who lifted the fingerprints subpoenaed to testify?" Grayson looked at Carrington, who awkwardly shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "So we're just supposed to take their word for it?" Jalen asked. "No chain of custody, no chance to cross-examine, just trust them?" The cracks were turning into fissures now, but Jalen had saved his most powerful argument for last. "I'd like to submit into evidence," he said, pulling a document from his file. "A statement from the vehicle's owner, Mr. Raymond Whitaker. The original police report includes a line that the prosecution didn't mention." He read aloud. "I left my car running when I went inside. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy they arrested. I saw the kid. He was white." A collective gasp ran through the courtroom. Carrington flinched. Jalen held up the page. "That's from the original report. The prosecution left it out. Why?" Grayson didn't answer. Carrington didn't either. "The truth is," Jalen continued, his voice quieter now but full of emotion, "I was blocks away from the stolen car when I was arrested. I wasn't in it. I wasn't running. I was walking home from getting snacks with friends." He looked directly at the jury. The real suspect got away, and the police grabbed the nearest black teenager they could find. That's what this case is really about. Not guilt, not evidence, just assumptions. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Grayson cleared his throat. "Does the prosecution have anything else?" Carrington's face was pale, his voice barely audible. "No, Your Honor." Grayson looked at Jalen, then at the jury. Then he exhaled slowly and said the words that would stay with everyone who had been in that courtroom that day. Case dismissed. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room exploded. Reporters stood, scribbling frantically. Spectators murmured, some cheering, others stunned into silence. But Jalen didn't react. He just stood still, breathing deeply, letting the moment wash over him. He had walked into that courtroom as a suspect. He walked out as something much more, a young man who stood up to the system and reminded everyone watching what real justice is supposed to look like.